The baby gorilla had never been this close to humans before, not safely, not gently, not with people who actually wanted to help him. So when the caretaker slowly reached her hand toward him, everyone in that room expected him to pull back, to flinch, to press himself further into the corner. He didn't. He stared at her gloved hand, and then he lifted his own tiny hand toward it. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. They had been calling him the cub since he arrived. Nobody had given him a real name yet. That comes later, if things go well. And when he came in, nobody was sure things were going to go well. 2 days before, rangers doing a routine check near a protected forest in Central Africa had found him alone. There had been a bad storm the night before. Wind, heavy rain, the kind of weather that disorients animals and separates troops. By the time it cleared, he was by himself near the tree line, sitting on the ground, barely reacting when the men approached. He was weak, he was scared, and he was very, very young. The vet figured somewhere around 8 to 12 months old, which meant he had never once been without his mother for more than a few minutes, and now she was gone, and he didn't know where, and he didn't understand any of what was happening to him. The physical side of things was hard but manageable. The other part was harder. He wouldn't eat, wouldn't make a sound, wouldn't let anyone close. He just sat in the corner of the care room and watched whoever came in with these wide, exhausted eyes. Not panicking, not screaming, just watching, waiting to figure out what kind of danger this was. The room they put him in was kept dim and quiet, a few pieces of fruit on the floor near him, voices low if anyone had to speak at all. The staff had worked with orphaned primates before, but that doesn't mean you ever really know what you're walking into. Each animal is its own thing. Each one has been through something specific, something you weren't there for, and you have to figure out the shape of that fear before you can do much about it. He sat with his back to the corner, and his arms pulled close to his chest, and he didn't touch the fruit. Hours passed. The fruit stayed exactly where it had been placed. Mara was the one who tried first. She had been doing this kind of work for over a decade, and the thing people noticed about her, especially people who were newer to it, was that she never seemed to be in a hurry, not performed patience, not someone counting to 10 before they act. Genuine slowness, like she had made some private decision a long time ago, that rushing was just not something she was going to do in this room. She came in without making noise, didn't go toward him, went to the far side of the room and sat down on the floor, her back not quite to him but not facing him either. She put a small piece of banana beside her and slid it a few inches in his direction. Then she stopped. She wasn't looking at him. She wasn't looking away in a dramatic, obvious way either. Just sitting, present, not pushing anything. The cub looked at the banana, looked at her, looked at the banana again. He didn't move. She turned her head slightly to one side. It sounds like a small thing, but it isn't. It's one of the ways you signal to a frightened primate that you are not a threat, not coming for them, not performing some kind of authority, just existing nearby. A few more minutes went by, and then the cub moved, not fast, not like he was starving, and finally gave in. Slowly, deliberately, he reached out one arm, picked up the piece of banana with both hands, and held it. And here's the thing, he didn't eat it right away. He held it, and he kept his eyes on Mara. Like eating was secondary. Like the more important question was still being worked out. Is she safe? That's what he was trying to figure out. Not what the food was, whether she was. He ate slowly. Mara didn't move. When he finished, she extended one gloved hand out to her side, low to the ground, palm up, not reaching toward him, just leaving it there. The people watching from outside the room stopped breathing. The cub looked at the hand, looked at her face, looked at the hand again. Then he leaned forward and touched one finger. Barely anything. The lightest contact you can imagine, the tip of his finger against hers, and he made a sound. It was soft, almost nothing, more like a breath with a little shape to it than an actual vocalization. But it was real, and it was the first sound he had made since they brought him in, and the room went so quiet you could hear the hum of the lights in the hallway. Nobody celebrated. Mara didn't smile or pull him in or make a big thing of it. You don't. You stay still and you let the moment be what it is, because the second you change anything you might lose it. And then the cub pulled back, not gradually. All at once his whole small body went stiff, and his head turned toward the door, and the look on his face was not startled. It was something more specific than that. Footsteps in the hallway, someone walking with a heavy step, and the way the cub reacted, the stillness, the locked eyes, the trembling that started in his shoulders and moved down. It wasn't the reaction of an animal that had heard a loud noise. It was the reaction of an animal that recognized something. Whatever had happened to him before the rangers found him, it wasn't just the storm, The footsteps slowed outside the door, then stopped. Whoever it was had paused in the hallway, maybe checking something, maybe just standing there for a moment. It didn't matter. The damage was already done. The cub had pressed himself back into the corner. His shoulders were drawn up high, his chin tucked down, and he was trembling in that quiet, contained way that is somehow worse than screaming, like the fear was too big to make noise about, like he had already learned somewhere that making noise didn't help. Mara stayed on the floor. She didn't turn around. She didn't call out to whoever was in the hall. She just stayed exactly where she was, and kept her voice low and even, and said nothing in particular. Just sounds, just presence, just something to anchor him to this room instead of wherever his mind had gone. It took a long time for the trembling to stop. That night the staff had a conversation about what they had seen, not just the trembling, a loud bang, a sudden movement, even a door swinging open too fast. Those things startle most animals, and you expect a fear response. But this was different. This cub had heard footsteps, a particular kind of footstep, heavy, slow, deliberate, and something in that sound had pulled him somewhere specific, somewhere he had already been. Nobody knew exactly what had happened to him before the Rangers found him. The troop had scattered and hadn't been relocated yet. His mother's fate was unknown. What little they could piece together from the patrol report was that he had been alone for somewhere between several hours and a full day before he was found. Long enough that whatever he had seen or heard or experienced had already started to shape the way he read the world. The wildlife vet, a quiet man named Dr. Adisa, who had been at the facility for 7 years, said it plainly. Something frightened this animal before we got to him. Something with a heavy footfall. We need to figure out what his fear looks like so we can work around it, or we're going to keep losing ground. That was the job now, not just keeping him alive, understanding the shape of what had hurt him. They changed how people moved in and around his room. No one entered quickly. No one stood at full height near him if they could help it. Crouching, sitting, keeping the body lower and less imposing. Voices stayed quiet, not whispered, just measured. The door was opened slowly every single time, with a pause before anyone came through. Small adjustments, the kind that don't feel like much until you see what happens without them. Within a day the difference was visible. He was still watchful, still guarded. He still tracked every person who came in with those careful, exhausted eyes. But the trembling stopped being automatic. He wasn't flinching at every small sound. He was starting to read the room rather than just react to it, which meant something in him was beginning to trust that the room was at least somewhat predictable. That matters more than people realize. Predictability. For an animal coming out of trauma, it isn't affection that starts to heal things first. It's consistency. The same movements, the same sounds, the same person at the same time, doing the same things in the same order. The world becoming something that can be anticipated rather than something that just happens to you. Mara understood this. She had understood it for years. She came in at the same time each morning. She sat in the same spot. She moved the same way. She didn't push for more contact than the day before. She just showed up and was the same, over and over, and let him decide what to do with that. The feeding was still a problem. He was taking small amounts of fruit, enough to keep the vet from making an emergency intervention, but not enough. Not nearly enough for an animal his size and age who was also fighting off the physical effects of stress and mild dehydration. He needed more calories. He needed protein. He needed the kind of nutrition that fruit alone wasn't going to provide. They needed him to take formula. Dr. Adisa introduced the bottle carefully, the way you would with any young primate, warmed to the right temperature, offered at low height, no pressure, just available. The cub looked at it, turned his head away, looked at it again, and then leaned back and made it very clear he was not interested. They tried for 3 days. Different positions, different times of day, different people holding it. Nothing. The vet was honest with the staff. They had a window, not a wide one. If his caloric intake didn't improve meaningfully within the next several days, they would be looking at more aggressive intervention, which would mean handling him more directly, which would set back everything Mara had built in terms of trust. It was the kind of situation where every option had a cost. On the 4th night, Mara left a soft folded towel in the corner near where he slept. Nothing special about it, just something textured and warm and present. The staff had used comfort objects before with young primates. Sometimes it helped with sleep, sometimes it helped with nothing. You tried things. The camera footage from that night showed the cub ignoring it for several hours. Then sometime after midnight he reached out one arm and pulled it closer. He didn't wrap himself in it. He just rested one hand on top of it, the way a very small child might rest a hand on a blanket without fully holding it, just touching, just checking that it was still there. He slept better that night than he had since arriving. The next morning Mara came in at her usual time. She had the towel with her, she had retrieved it carefully without disturbing him, and she placed it in the same corner before sitting down. She had a small amount of fruit, and beside it quietly the bottle of formula. She didn't present it to him, she didn't offer it or draw attention to it. She just set it down as part of the arrangement, the same way the fruit was part of the arrangement, and she sat back and waited. The cub woke slowly, looked at her, looked at the towel, moved toward it in that slow, deliberate way he had, and sat beside it. He reached for a piece of fruit, ate it, looked at the bottle, looked away, then looked back. He reached out one hand and touched the side of the bottle, pulled his hand back, touched it again. Mara did not move, did not react, did not make anything of it, and then for the first time he accepted the bottle. Just a small amount, a few pulls, and then he was done, and he leaned back and looked at her with an expression that was impossible to fully read. But he had done it. He had chosen to. Nobody had forced anything, nobody had tricked him into it. He had decided on his own that it was safe enough to try. Dr. Adisa, watching from outside, quietly exhaled. It wasn't solved, not even close, but it was real, and real was enough for today. That evening, after the last check of the night, one of the younger staff members pulled up the camera feed before heading home. The cub was awake, sitting in the near dark with one hand resting on the towel. But he wasn't facing the corner anymore. He was facing the door. Mara noticed it the moment she stepped in. He was already awake, already watching the door before she opened it. Not with fear, that was the thing. The posture was different. His shoulders weren't drawn up, his chin wasn't tucked. He was just sitting there, near the towel, looking at the door the way you look at something you've been waiting for. She didn't make anything of it. She came in the same way she always did. Slow, low, same spot on the floor, same fruit placed out beside her. But this morning she didn't put the formula bottle down right away. She just sat with the fruit and waited. Several minutes passed. Nothing happened. The cub looked at the fruit, looked at her, did the same quiet calculation he always did. Then he stood up. Not fully. Gorillas his age don't move like adults yet. It's more of an unfolding, a gradual getting of limbs underneath him. He took one step toward her, stopped, took another. Nobody outside the room moved. He got close enough that Mara could have reached him easily if she had wanted to. She didn't reach. She stayed exactly as she was, hands in her lap, and let him close the distance on his own terms. He looked at the fruit beside her. Then he looked at her hand, and he ignored the fruit entirely. He reached out and grabbed the cuff of her sleeve. Not hard, not desperate, just held it, the way a very small child holds onto something to steady themselves while they figure out what they want to do next. He looked at the fabric, looked at her face, then he moved his hand from the sleeve to her gloved fingers and just held on. Mara stayed still, kept her breathing even. He sat down next to her knee, not in her lap. He wasn't looking for that kind of contact, just close, just near enough that he could feel that she was there without having to look. It was a small thing to watch, and an enormous thing to understand. He had walked past food to get to her. For an animal in recovery, still underweight, still not eating nearly enough, that meant something. That was not instinct, that was a choice. Dr. Adisa came in quietly a few minutes later, while the cub was still sitting beside Mara. They had talked about trying the bottle again in exactly this kind of moment, when he was calm, when he was close to her, when his nervous system wasn't working against them. Mara kept her hand where it was. The vet lowered himself slowly to the floor a few feet away and brought the bottle out without any ceremony. Just held it out. Available. The cub looked at it, turned his head away, that same familiar refusal. Mara didn't say anything, didn't nudge him or gesture toward it, just stayed present. 30 seconds passed, maybe 40. The cub turned back, leaned forward, and took the bottle. He drank more this time than he ever had. Not a full feeding, but real progress, the kind that actually registers on a chart. Dr. Adisa kept his expression neutral, but when he caught the eye of the staff member near the door, he gave a small nod. They were getting somewhere. It didn't last. An hour later, a vehicle outside backfired in the parking area. Loud, sudden, the kind of sound that even the staff flinched at. The cub dropped everything, and was behind the exam table before anyone could react. He stayed there for a long time. Wouldn't come out for the rest of the afternoon. Wouldn't eat again. Mara sat near the table and talked to him in a low, steady voice, and didn't ask him to come out. She just stayed close and let him hear that she was still there. By evening he had moved back to his towel. One bad sound, 1 hour, and he was most of the way back to where he had started 3 days ago. That was the reality of this work. Progress wasn't a straight line. It was a step forward, and then something loud in a parking lot, and then you started again. You didn't panic about it. You just started again. That night, Mara stayed later than usual. Before she left, she checked the camera feed from her phone in the hallway. The cub was awake, sitting in the low light with one hand on the towel. And then slowly he reached one arm out toward the door. Not trembling, not afraid, just reaching, like he already knew she'd be back in the morning. She was back in the morning. Same time, same quiet entry, same spot on the floor. But this time, before she had even fully settled, the cub was already moving toward her. Not running, not dramatic, just crossing the room with that slow, deliberate walk, like he had made up his mind about something during the night and was simply following through on it now. He sat beside her knee, put his hand on her fingers, and that was how the day started. The days that followed built on each other in small ways. Mara kept the routine tight, same time every morning, same movements, same voice, same careful distance that she let him close whenever he chose to. The formula feedings became more consistent, not perfect. There were still mornings he refused, still moments where something in the room shifted and he pulled back into himself. But the refusing started to be the exception rather than the rule. He was getting stronger. It showed in small ways first. The way he moved around the room with a little more confidence. The way he started to investigate things. The towel, the walls, the corners, instead of just monitoring them. Curiosity is a good sign in a recovering animal. Fear keeps you still. When they start to move around and touch things and pull at things, something is loosening. Dr. Adisa noted the weight gain at the end of the second week. Modest but real. His temperature had been stable for days. The vet said carefully that he felt cautiously good about where things were heading. Around this time, the staff began talking more openly about what came next. The goal had never been to make him comfortable with people permanently. That would have been the wrong kind of success. A gorilla who loses his weariness of humans entirely is a gorilla who is vulnerable in ways that matter for the rest of his life. The work Mara was doing, the patience, the routine, the slow accumulation of trust, it wasn't about making him tame. It was about keeping him alive long enough and stable enough to eventually place him with other gorillas, a sanctuary troop, animals who could give him what no human could. Mara knew this. She had always known it. It was part of why she was good at the job. She never confused what she felt about an animal with what was best for it. Love in this kind of work looks like letting go. It looks like doing everything right so that one day your presence is no longer the thing he needs most. She didn't talk about it much. She just kept showing up. 3.5 weeks after he arrived, they had what the staff quietly referred to afterward as the last close session. Not the last time Mara would see him. There would still be monitoring, still check-ins, still a transition period before any placement. But the last session of this particular kind of closeness, the daily floor time, the hand contact, the slow, careful work of being the thing that stood between him and total withdrawal. She came in the same way she always had. Sat in the same spot. The cub crossed the room and sat beside her. She extended her gloved hand, low, palm up. He looked at it for a moment. Then he reached out and touched one finger. The same light contact as that very first time, weeks ago. But nothing else about it was the same. He wasn't shaking. His shoulders were relaxed. He made that same soft sound he had made the first day. That small, shaped breath, and then he just sat with her hand in both of his and looked around the room calmly, like a creature who had decided the world was unbalanced, probably all right. Mara didn't move for a long time. He had come in expecting danger. That was the honest truth of it. Whatever he had experienced before the Rangers found him, it had taught him that the world was something to be afraid of, and that fear had been the first language he spoke in that room. The stillness, the silence, the careful watching. But somewhere in the weeks between that first terrible trembling and this quiet morning, something had shifted. Not erased. Trauma doesn't erase. It just slowly stops being the loudest thing in the room. What had shifted was that there was now something else alongside it. Something he had learned from a woman who sat on floors and moved slowly and always came back at the same time every morning. The world could also be predictable. People could also be safe. And a hand extended low and open and without any demand behind it could be something worth reaching for. He had figured that out himself. Nobody had convinced him. He had just been given enough time and enough consistency that he was able to find it on his own. That was the whole job. That had always been the whole job. Weeks later, preparations for his transfer were underway. Mara did not let herself think too far ahead. She focused on the morning, the room, the cub sitting beside her with one hand resting on her fingers, calm and present and so much stronger than the trembling animal who had arrived in the corner of this room not long ago. She stayed until he let go on his own. Then she stood up slowly, the way she always did, and she left the room the way she always left it, quietly, without looking back. Because that too was part of loving something correctly.